Subscribe now, because what you're about to read will prove that sometimes your deepest vulnerability becomes your greatest strength. A 26-year-old accountant who's never been kissed, never been touched, never let anyone close enough to see the real her. Until the day the confident, brilliant executive returns from London and notices the quiet woman everyone else overlooks. She expects judgment when he discovers her inexperience. Instead, he trembles with something that looks like reverence, holds her face like she's made of glass, and whispers that her trust is the greatest gift anyone has ever given him. This story has years of loneliness that will break your heart. A first kiss in an empty office that changes everything. A man patient enough to wait 1,000 years. And an ending so tender it will remind you that the right person doesn't rush you. They honor every step of your journey. Don't miss a single word of this transformation from invisible to cherished. From untouched to beloved. Warsaw, mid-October. Rain drummed against the windows of the old tenement building on Braka Street, while Paulina Tomaszewska sat at her desk, staring at the computer screen without really seeing the numbers. She was 26 years old, but often felt like a teenager, uncertain, invisible, undiscovered. She worked as an accountant at a medium-sized company importing furniture from Italy. She was precise, punctual, and extremely efficient. People in the office liked her, but no one really knew her. Paulina always kept her distance, hiding behind a polite smile and professional tone. Her life was ordered, predictable. Every morning she woke at 6:30, prepared coffee and toast, then walked to the office through the streets of downtown Chicago. She liked this routine. It gave her a sense of control in a world that often seemed too chaotic, too loud, too intense for someone like her. "Paulina, do you have a moment?" The voice pulled her from her thoughts. She looked up and saw Marta, her only real friend at the company. Marta was Paulina's complete opposite, loud, spontaneous, always surrounded by people. She had reddish hair worn in a messy bun and an infectious laugh that echoed through the entire office. "Of course. What's up?" Paulina asked, setting down her pen. Marta sat on the edge of her desk, leaning in conspiratorially. Her eyes gleamed with excitement. "Have you heard yet? Arthur Bennett is coming back to the company." Paulina's heart beat harder. Arthur. That man was a legend at the firm, even though he'd worked there only 2 years. Charismatic, intelligent, a bit arrogant. He'd left 3 years ago to work in London, and now he was returning as chief operating officer. Paulina remembered him well, maybe too well. She remembered how he entered the office every morning with coffee in hand, how his voice resonated during meetings, how he laughed at his own jokes. But most of all, she remembered the moment he looked at her for a longer moment in the elevator once. Only a few seconds, but long enough for her to feel her cheeks burning. "Why is he coming back?" Paulina asked, trying to hide her nervousness. "Apparently, he got a great offer. He'll be overseeing all departments, including accounting." Marta winked at her. "Maybe someone will finally shake up this office. God, I remember how everyone was in love with him. Even Mr. Kowalski from management, and that guy doesn't smile even at Christmas." Paulina didn't respond. Instead, she focused her gaze on the computer screen, pretending to check something important, but the numbers blurred before her eyes. Marta sighed theatrically. "You know, someday you should come out of that shell, Paulina. I don't want you to spend the rest of your life alone, staring at spreadsheets." "I'm happy," Paulina replied quietly. "Are you really?" Marta looked at her with concern. "When was the last time you went on a date? When was the last time you kissed anyone?" Paulina felt her stomach clench. Never. The answer was never, but she couldn't say that out loud. Instead, she shrugged. "I'm just not looking for anyone right now." Marta shook her head but smiled gently. Okay, I won't push. But I promise that one day I'll take you out for a girls' night and show you how to live." After Marta left, Paulina rested her head in her hands. She knew her friend had good intentions, but sometimes these conversations hurt more than Marta could imagine. The truth was that Paulina had never had a boyfriend, had never been kissed. At age 26, she was still untouched by love, by intimacy, by anything most people considered normal at her age. It wasn't that she didn't want it. She did. Sometimes at night she lay in bed and imagined what it would be like to be held, kissed, loved. But there was always something that stopped her. Fear of rejection, fear of not being good enough, fear of being seen. The day Arthur returned was cold and windy. Chestnut leaves from the trees on Braca Street danced in the air before falling onto the wet sidewalk. The sky was gray, full of heavy clouds, promising more rain. Paulina entered the office early as always, hoping to avoid crowds and curious glances. She took off her coat, hung it on the rack, and sat at her desk in the corner of the room. She liked this spot. It was quiet, separated from the main office traffic by filing cabinets. But as soon as she turned on her computer, the door burst open. "Good morning, everyone." Arthur Bennett entered the room with a wide smile, bringing with him energy that immediately filled the space. He was 32 years old, tall, with dark hair slicked back and amber-colored eyes. He wore an elegant navy suit, but the unbuttoned collar and lack of tie suggested he wasn't your typical corporate robot. In his hand he carried a leather briefcase that looked expensive. "I see not much has changed here," he said, looking around the office with amusement. "Same desks, same walls, even the same coffee smell from that machine that probably should have been replaced by now." Several people laughed. His gaze moved around the room, stopping on each face as if trying to refresh his memory, and then his eyes landed on Paulina. They stopped for a fraction of a second longer than on others. "Hi, are you new?" he asked, approaching her desk. Paulina felt her face burning. Every pair of eyes in the office turned toward her. "No, I've worked here for 5 years, she replied, quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. Arthur raised an eyebrow, as if genuinely surprised. "Really?" He stopped in front of her desk, studying her face. "I'm sorry. I don't remember, but that's probably my fault. I was mainly focused on international projects back then." He extended his hand. "Arthur Bennett." Paulina stood up awkwardly, almost knocking over a cup of pens. She shook his hand. It was warm, confident, strong. "Paulina Tomaszewska. Nice to meet you, Paulina." His smile was, genuine, but there was something else in his eyes. Curiosity, interest. He held her hand a second too long, then released it. "I hope we'll work well together." Before she could respond, the other employees began gathering around him, greeting him, asking questions about London, laughing at his jokes. Paulina withdrew back to her desk, grateful for invisibility. But something had changed, something in the way he looked at her. The following days were strange. Arthur was everywhere, in meetings, in the kitchen, in the hallways. He was getting reacquainted with the company, talking to everyone, taking notes in his notebook. And every time Paulina saw him, it seemed he saw her too. Not in an intrusive or inappropriate way. He just looked, as if trying to figure her out, understand something that escaped others. On Wednesday during lunch, Paulina sat alone in the small kitchen on the 3rd floor, eating a sandwich and reading a book. This was her favorite place. Most people used the large cafeteria on the ground floor so she could have a moment of peace. But that day, the door opened, and Arthur walked in. "Oh, sorry," he said, stopping. "I didn't know anyone was here." "It's fine," Paulina replied quickly, closing her book. Arthur approached the coffee maker, but instead of leaving immediately, he leaned against the counter and looked at her. "What are you reading?" Paulina held up the book. It was a novel by Toni Morrison. "Beloved." "Ah, Morrison." Arthur nodded with recognition. "I read Song of Solomon in London. Incredible writer. Sometimes difficult, but always worth the effort." Paulina was surprised. She hadn't expected someone like Arthur, confident, business-oriented, practical, to read contemporary literature. "You like to read?" she asked shyly. "Very much. In London I had long evenings after work. Reading was my form of escape." He smiled. "What about you? What do you like besides Morrison?" And so they began talking about books, about writers, about how literature helps survive difficult days. Arthur was surprisingly well-read, and his enthusiasm was infectious. Paulina forgot her shyness, talking about her favorite novels, about how books had been her companions through her whole life. Only when someone entered the kitchen did she realize they'd been talking for over 20 minutes. "I need to get back to work," Arthur said, but he seemed reluctant. "But this was nice, Paulina. Really. Maybe sometime you'll lend me something to, read?" "Sure," she replied, and her heart beat faster. When he left, Paulina sat in silence, trying to understand what had just happened. For the first time in her life, Someone was really talking to her. Not out of politeness, not out of obligation, just talking. And that someone was Arthur Bennett. Friday came faster than Paulina expected. All week she'd tried not to think about Arthur, but it was impossible. Their conversation in the kitchen still echoed in her head. The way he looked at her, the way he listened to her words as if truly considering them. That morning the sky over Chicago was leaden, heavy with approaching rain. Paulina walked to work along her usual route, passing old buildings and small cafes that were just opening their doors. The air was cool, smelling of autumn, damp leaves and smoke from chimneys. When she reached the office, most people were already there. There was a strange atmosphere, excitement mixed with nervousness. Paulina quickly learned why. Big meeting. "Today," Marta said, appearing at her desk with a cup of coffee. "Arthur is presenting his vision for changes in the company. Everyone has to be in the conference room at 10. Paulina felt her stomach tighten. She didn't like large meetings. The crowd of people, all those eyes, the pressure of being visible. It all made her feel sick. "Is it mandatory?" she asked weakly. Marta looked at her with pity. "Yes, sweetheart, even for you. But don't worry. Just sit in the back and be quiet, like you." Like? 10 o'clock came too quickly. Paulina entered the conference room together with other employees from the accounting department. The room was large, with a long table in the middle, and rows of chairs along the walls. A large screen at the end of the room displayed the company logo. Paulina chose a seat by the wall, far from the main table. She sat quietly, holding a notepad on her lap, hoping to become invisible. Arthur entered a few minutes later, carrying a laptop and thick stack of documents. He looked professional in a dark suit, but his hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd run his hand through it too many times. In his eyes was fatigue, but also determination. "Good morning, everyone," he began. His voice filled the room effortlessly. "Thank you for finding time for this meeting. I know you're busy, so I'll try to be concise." For the next hour, Arthur presented his plans for company reorganization. He talked about process optimization, improving communication between departments, investing in new technologies. He was eloquent, convincing, full of passion. People listened attentively. Some nodded in agreement. Paulina tried to focus on his words, but instead she observed him. The way he gesticulated while speaking, the way he smiled when someone asked a good question, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about things he cared about. And then, midway through the presentation, his gaze moved across the room and stopped on her, only for a second, but long enough for her to feel her breath quicken. Did he know she was watching him? Did he notice how intensely she was observing? Paulina quickly looked down at her notepad, pretending to write something. Her heart pounded wildly. When the meeting ended, people began leaving, talking among themselves about the presented plans. Paulina wanted to quickly slip out of the room, but as she stood, she heard his voice. "Paulina, do you have a moment?" She froze. Several people turned to see who Arthur E. was talking to. Marta sent her a questioning look, but Paulina just nodded. "Of course," she replied quietly, approaching him. Arthur waited until the room emptied before speaking again. "I need your help," he said, closing his laptop. "I want to analyze all financial reports from the last 3 years. I need to understand where we're losing money and where we can improve efficiency. I heard you're the best at what you do." Paulina was surprised. "Who told you that?" "Mrs. Novak from management. Said you're the most meticulous person in the accounting department, that you never make mistakes." Paulina felt her cheeks burning. No one had ever complimented her this way. Thank you. Of course I'll help." Arthur smiled, and it was a genuine smile, warm and sincere. "Great. Could we meet on Monday? Maybe we could go through the documents together, discuss details?" "Yes, that sounds good." "Excellent." He began packing his things, but suddenly stopped and looked at her. "By the way, I noticed you were reading Beloved in the kitchen. Have you finished it?" Paulina nodded. "Last night. And? Worth the effort?" "Yes," she replied, and her voice became more confident when talking about something she loved. "It's a beautiful book. Morrison has a way of writing about trauma and memory that makes it feel like ghosts are real, like the past can literally haunt you." Arthur listened attentively, his eyes focused on her face. "That's beautifully put," he said quietly. "You have a talent for describing literature. Do you know that?" Paulina didn't know what to answer. No one had ever told her she had any talent. "Thank you," she mumbled. For several seconds they stood in silence, looking at each other. Something hung in the air. Something unspoken. Something electric. Then Arthur cleared his throat and looked away. "I should go. See you Monday, Paulina." "See you." Paulina left the conference room in a strange trance. Her mind was spinning. What was that? Why did he look at her that way? And why, when he was close, did she feel like the air was thicker, harder to breathe? The weekend passed in a strange fog. Paulina spent Saturday cleaning her small apartment on Armitage Avenue in Lincoln Park. One bedroom, modest but cozy. She had shelves full of books, a comfortable armchair by the window where she liked to read, and a small kitchen where she cooked simple meals. Sunday she went for a walk in Lincoln Park. It was cold but sunny, and the park was full of people, families with children, couples holding hands, elderly people feeding ducks. Paulina walked alone, as always, observing others and wondering what it was like to be part of that world. Would she ever have what they had? Would she ever let someone close enough to know her? Thoughts of Arthur kept returning. The way he smiled at her. The way he listened when she talked about books. The way he made her feel seen. But it was dangerous. Paulina knew this. She couldn't allow herself to dream about someone like Arthur. He was beyond her reach, confident, experienced. He probably had dozens of women in his life, and she was nobody, a quiet accountant who'd never been kissed. Monday came too quickly. Paulina arrived at work with a mixture of excitement and fear. She knew she'd have to spend time alone with Arthur, going through financial documents, and she wasn't sure she could stay calm. At 10:30, she knocked on his new office on the 4th floor. It was larger than other managers' offices, with a big window overlooking the street and a solid wooden desk. "Come in," she heard his voice. She opened the door and entered. Arthur sat behind his desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and open folders. He looked tired, as if he hadn't slept well. "Hi, Paulina," he said, smiling weakly. "Thanks for coming. I hope you have time, because we'll be here for a while." "I have time," she replied, sitting in the chair across from him. For the next 3 hours they worked together, reviewing reports, analyzing numbers, discussing spending patterns. Paulina was in her element. Numbers made sense, were logical, predictable, and Arthur turned out to be an excellent listener, asking intelligent questions, noting her observations. "See here?" She pointed to a spreadsheet. "In the 3rd quarter of last year, transportation costs increased by 23%, but revenue remained stable. This suggests we have a problem with delivery route optimization." Arthur leaned closer, studying the numbers. He was so close that Paulina could smell his cologne, something fresh, woody. "You're right," he said quietly. "This is exactly what I was looking for. Paulina, you're brilliant." She blushed, looking away. "It's just numbers." "No, it's more than that." He leaned back in his chair, looking at her with admiration. "You have a gift for seeing things others don't see. That's a rare skill." For a moment they sat in silence. Then Arthur sighed. "Can I ask you something?" "Something personal?" Paulina froze. Her heart accelerated. "Of course. Why are you so quiet?" His voice was gentle, without judgment. "You've worked here for 5 years, but it seems like no one really knows you. Why do you hide?" The question was so direct, so unexpected, that Paulina didn't know what to answer. She felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she bit her lip, holding them back. "I don't know," she finally said. "I'm just like this. I've always been quiet." Arthur leaned forward. His eyes were serious. "But you don't want to be, do you?" It was too much, too intimate, too real. Paulina stood suddenly, turning to the window to hide her emotions. "I should go. I still have a lot of work." "Paulina, wait." Arthur also stood, approaching her. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked. It's none of my business." "Everything's fine," she said quickly, but her voice trembled. Arthur stood beside her at the window. From their height, you could see Chicago streets, traffic, people hurrying to work, trains sliding along tracks. "You know what?" he said quietly. "I sometimes feel lonely too. In London I was surrounded by people, but I never felt really connected to them. Everything was so superficial, so empty." Paulina looked at him, surprised. She hadn't expected someone like Arthur to feel lonely. "Really, really," he smiled sadly. "That's why I came back. I needed something real, something that matters." They stood in silence, looking at the city beyond the window. And in that, Moment Paulina felt something she'd never felt before. Connection. As if someone finally understood that empty space in her heart. "Thank you," she whispered, "for sharing that." Arthur turned to her, and suddenly he was very close. So close she could see golden flecks in his eyes, fine wrinkles around his mouth. "Paulina," he said quietly. His voice was low, full of something she couldn't identify. "I'd like to get to know you better. The real you, not just the accountant at the desk." Paulina's heart pounded so hard she was afraid he might hear it. "I don't know if—" But before she could finish, the office door burst open. "Arthur, I need you at the management meeting immediately." Mr. Kowalski, the general director, stood in the doorway, looking stressed. Arthur stepped back, closing his eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. "Of course, I'm coming." Paulina used that moment to quickly gather her things. "I'll email you the rest of the reports," she said, without looking at him. "Paulina!" But she'd already left, practically running down the corridor to her desk. Her mind was spinning. What just happened? What was Arthur trying to tell her? And why did her heart still beat so fast, as if she'd just run a marathon? She sat at her desk, trying to calm down, but his words still echoed in her head. "I'd like to get to know you better." No one had ever wanted to know her better. And now, when someone finally did, Paulina had no idea what to do with it. The following days were torture. Paulina tried to avoid Arthur, but it was impossible in such a small company. She saw him in corridors, in the elevator, during meetings. Every time their eyes met, she felt that same electric tension that made her lose her breath. Arthur tried to talk to her several times, but she always found an excuse to slip away. She had a meeting, had to finish a report. The phone was ringing. Anything to not be alone with him. She wasn't ready. She didn't know how to face what she felt. Thursday evening. Paulina stayed at the office late. Most people had already left, and the corridors were empty and quiet. She liked working after hours. No distractions, no curious glances, just her and her numbers. She was so focused on a spreadsheet that she didn't hear footsteps approaching her desk. "Working late?" Paulina jumped, almost dropping her cup of cold coffee. She turned and saw Arthur standing in the doorway. He had a loosened tie, unbuttoned top button, and his hair was disheveled as if he'd run his hand through it 1,000 times. Yes, I have to finish this report by tomorrow." Arthur entered, closing the door behind him. The office suddenly seemed smaller, more intimate. "Paulina, we need to talk." Her heart beat harder. "About what?" "About what's happening between us." He approached closer, leaning against her desk. "I know you feel it. This tension, this connection." Paulina stood, turning her back to him, pretending to look for something in the file cabinet. "I don't know what you're talking about. You're lying." His voice was gentle but firm. "And you're not good at lying." Paulina froze. She felt his presence just behind her, the warmth of his body. "Arthur, please." "Please what?" He turned her gently so she had to look at him. His eyes were intense, full of emotions that made Paulina feel weak. "Please stop, or please tell you the truth." "I don't know," she whispered. "I'm scared." Arthur's expression softened. He raised his hand as if to touch her cheek, but stopped halfway. "What are you afraid of?" Paulina felt tears welling up in her eyes. All these years of loneliness, all these moments when she felt invisible, unloved. Everything suddenly spilled to the surface. "I'm afraid I'm not good enough, that when you know me, you'll be disappointed." Her voice broke. "I'm boring, Arthur. I'm quiet, uninteresting. I've never done anything exciting. I've never—" She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "Never what?" he asked quietly. Paulina closed her eyes, feeling a blush spreading across her face. "I've never been in a relationship. Never. No one has ever kissed me. At 26 years old, I'm completely inexperienced. I'm weird." The silence that fell was deafening. Paulina wanted to run, hide, disappear, but she couldn't move. Then she felt Arthur's fingers under her chin, gently lifting her face, forcing her to look at him. "Paulina," he said, and his voice was full of tenderness. "You're not weird. You're extraordinary." She opened her eyes and saw in his face something that made her heart beat harder. Admiration, tenderness, something deeper. But no buts. His thumb gently stroked her cheek. "From the moment I came back, I couldn't stop thinking about you. The way you talk about books, the way you analyze numbers. The way you blush when someone compliments you. You're authentic. In a world full of masks and pretending, you're real. Paulina couldn't breathe. He was so close. His hand was still touching her face. His eyes were staring into hers. "Arthur, can I kiss you?" he asked quietly. Time stopped. Paulina heard only the beating of her own heart, felt only the warmth of his hand on her skin. Slowly she nodded. Arthur leaned in, and their faces were only inches apart. Paulina closed her eyes, feeling every nerve in her body burning with anticipation, and then his lips touched hers. It was a gentle kiss, almost shy. His lips were warm and soft, moving slowly as if giving her time to get used to this new feeling. Paulina froze for a second, then instinct took control. She returned the kiss, awkwardly but sincerely. Arthur deepened the kiss, his hand moving to the back of her head, fingers tangling in her hair. His other hand embraced her waist, pulling her closer. Paulina felt her knees weaken, felt the world around her dissolve into nothing. There was only Arthur, his touch, his kiss. But suddenly she felt his body stiffen. The kiss slowed, then stopped. Arthur pulled back, looking at her with wide eyes. "That was your first kiss?" he asked, and in his voice was disbelief. Paulina nodded, still dazed, still tasting his lips on hers. "Yes." Arthur closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. His shoulders trembled slightly. "Paulina," he whispered, opening his eyes, and what she saw in them took her breath away. He wasn't disappointed. On the contrary, in his eyes was something deep, intense, almost reverent. "You have no idea what this means to me." "What does it mean?" she asked, weakly. Arthur took her face in both hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. "It means you trust me, that you chose me to be that first. His voice broke slightly. "That's the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." Paulina felt tears streaming down her cheeks. Not tears of sadness, but of relief. He wasn't disappointed. He didn't think she was weird. "I thought you'd think something was wrong with me," she whispered. "There's nothing wrong with you." He kissed her forehead, then each cheek where tears had left tracks. "You're perfect, and I promise you I'll respect what you gave me. I won't rush you, won't pressure you. We'll go as slowly as you want." Paulina embraced him, hiding her face in his shoulder. For the first time in her life she felt safe, accepted, loved. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet, empty office, while outside dusk fell over Chicago. Everything changed after that kiss, but not in the way Paulina had feared. Arthur, was patient, tender, always respecting her boundaries. They began meeting after work, walks through the old town, coffee in small cafes, dinners in intimate restaurants. Friday evening, a week after their first kiss, Arthur invited her to his apartment. He lived in a modern apartment in River North with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the Chicago River. "It's beautiful," Paulina said, standing by the window and looking at the illuminated bridges reflecting in the water. Arthur approached her, placing 2 wine glasses on the windowsill. "I'm glad you like it." He embraced her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You know, I bought this apartment right before leaving for London, and then for 3 years it stood empty. Sometimes I wonder if it wasn't waiting for this moment, for you." Paulina turned in his arms, looking at him questioningly. "Do you really believe that? In destiny?" "I don't know," he replied honestly. "But I know that since I met you, everything makes more sense." He kissed her, and this time Paulina was less shy. She'd learned how to move her lips, how to return his tenderness. Their kiss became deeper, more passionate. Arthur led her to the couch where they sat together. His hands were everywhere, in her hair, on her back, on her waist, but always with respect, always waiting for her reaction. "Is this okay?" he asked every few minutes, making sure she felt comfortable. "Yes," she replied each time, and it was true. She felt, safe with him. But when his kisses began traveling down her neck, when she felt his hand on her thigh, something in her froze. "Arthur, wait," she whispered. He immediately stopped, pulling back slightly. "I'm sorry, too fast." Paulina nodded, feeling her heart pounding wildly. "I just need a moment." "Of course." Arthur embraced her, letting her rest her head on his shoulder. "We have all the time in the world, Paulina. There's no rush." She sat in his arms, listening to his heartbeat, feeling simultaneously grateful and frustrated with herself. Why couldn't she just let herself relax? Why was she still afraid? As if reading her thoughts, Arthur kissed the top of her head. "You know what I think," he said quietly. "I think you're braver than you believe. You let me into your life despite your fears. That requires enormous strength." "I don't feel strong," she admitted. "But you are." His fingers gently stroked her arm. "And you don't have to be ashamed that you need time. Intimacy isn't a race. It's a journey we take together." Paulina lifted her head, looking at him with tears in her eyes. "How is it possible you're so patient?" Arthur smiled sadly. "Because I know what it's like to feel lonely. And now that I've found you, I'm not going to lose you just because I'm impatient. I'd rather wait 1,000 years than ruin what we're building between us." Paulina kissed him then, long and deep, putting into that kiss everything she couldn't say with words. Gratitude, trust, and maybe something more. Something that was beginning to grow in her heart. Something warm and terrifying at the same time. Love. They spent the weekend together, walking through autumn Chicago. Arthur showed her his favorite places, a small bookstore on Michigan Avenue where they bought old editions of American classics, an atmospheric pub in Pilsen where they ate pierogies and drank beer, the Navy Pier where they stood and watched the sunset over the lake. "See that place?" Arthur Shue pointed to an old building on the other side of the water. "That was my first office when I finished college. I was so young, so confident. I thought I'd conquer the whole world." "And didn't you?" Paulina asked with a smile. "I conquered a piece, but it wasn't worth what I lost along the way." He put his arm around her. "I was so focused on career, on money, on success, that I forgot what really counts. Only in London, when I sat alone in an empty apartment every evening, did I understand that success without someone to share it with is empty." Paulina rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you think this is what you were looking for?" Arthur turned to her, taking her face in his hands. "I know this is it." He kissed her gently. "You are what I was looking for, Paulina, even if I didn't know it before." Paulina felt her heart breaking, but in the best possible way. For the first time in her life, someone chose her. Not out of necessity, not out of pity, but because they really wanted to. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm scared this is too beautiful to be real, that I'll wake up and find out it was just a dream." Arthur pulled her closer, holding tight. "This isn't a dream. I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together, Paulina. You and me against all the fears, all the doubts. Together." As they stood on the pier, embracing in the cold autumn air, Paulina felt something she'd never felt before. Hope. Hope that maybe there was a place for her in this world. That maybe she deserved happiness. That maybe, finally, she was loved. November came with full force, bringing cold wind and first frosts. Chicago changed into a city of gray and fog. But for Paulina, the world had never been more colorful. 4 weeks had passed since Arthur kissed her, and each day brought something new, small discoveries, quiet conversations, moments of intimacy that slowly built a bridge of trust between them. At work, they tried to maintain professionalism, but everyone already knew. Marta was thrilled, constantly approaching Paulina's desk with a wide smile and questions about details. Other employees noticed too, the way Arthur looked at Paulina during meetings, the way she blushed when he entered the room. Mr. Kowalski called them both to his office on the first Monday of November. Paulina was terrified, certain they'd get reprimanded, maybe even that she'd lose her job. "Sit down," the director said, indicating chairs in front of his desk. His face was serious, unreadable. Arthur took Paulina's hand, squeezing it lightly. "Mr. Director, if this is about our relationship—" Mr. Kowalski raised his hand, interrupting him. "I'm not blind, Arthur. I see what's happening." He paused, then surprisingly smiled. "And I have no problem with it, as long as it doesn't affect your work. And from what I see, you're both more productive than ever." Paulina felt tension leaving her body. "Thank you, Mr. Director. But remember," he added, his tone becoming serious again, "in the office you remain professional. No public displays of affection, no special treatment. Understood?" "Of course," Arthur replied. When they left the office, Paulina burst out laughing with relief. "I thought he'd fire us." Arthur hugged her quickly when no one was looking. "I'd never let that happen. I'd rather leave myself than let you lose your job because of me." That was exactly it. The way Arthur always put her first, always cared for her well-being. Paulina had never felt so valued. Friday evening, Arthur invited her to dinner at an elegant restaurant downtown. The place was intimate, with dimmed lights, white tablecloths, and candles on every table. The waiter led them to a corner table with a view of illuminated Michigan Avenue. "This is a beautiful place," Paulina said, looking around with admiration. "I wanted this evening to be special," Arthur replied, sitting across from her. Something in his tone made Paulina look at him more carefully. He seemed nervous, which was strange. Arthur was never nervous. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Yes, more than okay." He took her hand across the table. "Paulina, I need to tell you something." Her heart accelerated. Was something wrong? Had he changed his mind? "What is it?" Arthur took a deep breath. "I've fallen in love with you." Time stopped. Paulina sat motionless, staring at him with wide eyes, unable to believe what she'd just heard. "What?" "I've fallen in love with you," he repeated, his voice more confident now. "I know it's only been a month. I know maybe it's too early, but I can't hide this any longer. I wake up in the morning and think about you. I go to sleep and dream about you. Every moment I spend without you feels empty. I love you, Paulina. I love your quietness, your intelligence, the way you blush when someone compliments you. I love how seriously you take your work, how tenderly you treat books, how you look at the world. I love every part of you." Paulina felt tears welling up in her eyes. No one had ever said such words to her. No one had ever seen her the way Arthur did. Her voice broke. "You don't have to say anything," Arthur added quickly. "If you're not ready, I understand. I just wanted you to know how I feel." Paulina shook her head, squeezing his hand tighter. "No, I want to tell you something." She took a trembling breath. "I've fallen in love with you too. Maybe even earlier than you think. Maybe from the first day when you came back and looked at me in the office. I was terrified by this feeling. I didn't know what to do with it. But now I know. This is love. And it's the most beautiful and most terrifying thing I've experienced." Arthur stood and approached her side of the table, kneeling beside her. He took her face in his hands, and his eyes glistened with moisture. "Paulina Tomaszewska, will you give me the chance to show you what love should look like? Will you let me be the one who's beside you in good times and bad? Will you build a life with me, full of books, conversations, laughter, and everything you've always dreamed of?" Paulina was crying openly now, but they were tears of happiness. Yes, I want all of that." Arthur kissed her then, not caring about the people around them, about the waiter who discreetly looked away, about the elderly couple who smiled at each other with nostalgia. He kissed her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. And in that moment, Paulina understood something fundamental. She wasn't weird. She wasn't broken. There was nothing wrong with her. She was simply waiting for the right person, the right moment, for love that would be real. Several months later, in February, when snow covered Chicago's streets with a white blanket, Arthur moved into Paulina's small apartment on Armitage Avenue. The apartment was too small for two people, but neither of them cared. All that mattered was being together. In the evenings they read together, lying on the couch, their bodies intertwined, books open on their laps. Arthur often read aloud passages that moved him, and Paulina listened, observing the way his voice changed with each character's emotion. "You know what I was thinking," he said one evening, setting down his book. "What?" Paulina asked, running her fingers through his hair. "That life is strangely ironic. I spent years looking for something exceptional, something that would make me feel complete. I went to London thinking I'd find it there, and all along, what I needed was here, in a quiet woman at a desk in the corner of the room." Paulina smiled. "And I spent years convincing myself that happiness wasn't for me, that I was too different, too quiet, too everything. And then you came and showed me that being different isn't a flaw. It's just part of who I am." Arthur pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "I promise you something, Paulina. I promise that every day I'll remind you how exceptional you are, that I'll never let you forget how loved you are. And I make you a promise," she replied quietly. "I promise I'll be brave, that I'll show the world the real me without fear, because you taught me that I deserve to be seen." Spring came faster than they expected. In May, when trees along Armitage Avenue were covered with fresh greenery and the air smelled of lilacs, Paulina and Arthur decided on an important step. They found a larger apartment, 2 bedrooms in an old building in Wicker Park. It had high ceilings, wooden floors, and a large balcony where they could sit in the evenings, watching the sunset. Moving day was chaotic. Marta came to help along with several other friends from the office. Everyone laughed, carrying boxes, trying to fit furniture into the new layout. "I can't believe little Paulina is becoming independent," Marta said, setting down a box of books on the floor. "I remember when you were so quiet, I could barely hear your voice. And now look at you, living with a handsome guy, laughing, happy." Paulina hugged her friend. "Thank you for never giving up on me, for always trying to pull me out of my shell. I always knew the real you was in there," Marta replied with a smile. "You just needed someone to help you find her." When everyone left, leaving them alone in the new apartment full of unpacked boxes, Arthur embraced Paulina from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. Paulina turned in his arms, looking into those amber eyes she'd come to know so well, eyes full of love and warmth. "Happy is too weak a word," she replied. "I feel complete. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm exactly where I should be." Arthur kissed her, long and deep, then shifted his gaze to the room around them. "This is just the beginning, you know. We have our whole life ahead of us. So many books to read, so many places to visit, so many memories to create." "I know," Paulina whispered, "and I can't wait for every moment." 2 years later, on a sunny September day, Paulina and Arthur got married in a small church in downtown Chicago. The ceremony was intimate, only closest family and friends. Paulina wore a simple white dress with small white roses woven into her hair. When they stood before the altar, holding hands, the priest asked them to say their vows. Arthur spoke first, his voice strong and confident. "Paulina, I promise to love you every day, in sunshine and in rain, in happiness and in sorrow. I promise to be your safe place, your partner, your best friend. I promise never to let you forget how exceptional you are." Paulina took a trembling breath, looking into his eyes through a veil of tears. "Arthur, I promise to love you with all my heart. I promise to be brave, to be real, to share every part of myself with you. I promise that together we'll build a life full of love, laughter, and all the small moments that make life beautiful. Thank you for showing me I deserve happiness." When they exchanged rings, and the priest announced them husband and wife, Arthur kissed Paulina with such tenderness that several people in the church wiped away tears. At the wedding reception, in a small restaurant they'd rented for the occasion, Marta made a toast. "I've known Paulina for years," she said, raising her glass, "and I always knew she was someone special. But only when she met Arthur did I see her truly bloom. That's what love is. It doesn't change you, but it helps you become the best version of yourself. To the young couple, may your love always be as strong as today." Everyone raised their glasses, and Paulina hid her face in Arthur's shoulder, feeling overwhelmed with happiness. 3 years later, Paulina and Arthur still lived in the same apartment in Wicker Park, but now it had 3 rooms instead of 2. The third room was a nursery with pastel walls, shelves full of toys, and a small crib in the corner. Their daughter Sophie was now 1 year and 2 months old. She was a little girl with Arthur's dark hair and Paulina's blue eyes. She loved being read stories and could sit quietly for long periods, just observing the world around her. One evening when Sophie was already asleep, Paulina and Arthur sat on the balcony, drinking tea and looking at the stars over Chicago. "Sometimes I still can't believe all this is real," Paulina said quietly. "That I have you, that we have Sophie, that we built this life together." Arthur put his arm around her, pulling her closer. "And I can't believe I once thought I'd find happiness in career or money. Real happiness was always here." He kissed her temple. "In small moments, in quiet conversations, in sharing life with someone you love." Paulina looked at him with a smile. "Do you remember that day in the office when you kissed me for the first time? How could I forget?" Arthur laughed quietly. "I was so nervous. I was afraid I'd scare you, that you'd run away. But when you told me it was your first kiss," his voice softened, "that was the most intimate moment of my life. You trusted me with your heart, Paulina, and I promise I'll protect it until the end of my days." Paulina rested her head on his shoulder, feeling peace she never thought she'd experience. "You know what's best?" she asked. "What?" "That I didn't have to change to be loved. I didn't have to be loud, extroverted, different. You loved me as I am, quiet, awkward, full of fears. And you showed me that's enough, that I'm enough. Arthur turned her face to his, looking deeply into her eyes. You're not just enough, Paulina. You're everything. You're my world, my love, my home. And every day I thank fate that it directed me back to that company, to that office, to you. They kissed under the stars, as they'd done hundreds of times before. But each kiss still made Paulina's heart beat faster. Each touch still felt like the first time. Each moment together still felt like a gift. Inside the apartment, Sophie stirred in her sleep, her little hand reaching for her stuffed bear. And in the living room on the shelf stood books. Hundreds of books Paulina and Arthur had read together over the years. Each told a story, but none was as beautiful as their own. The story of a quiet woman who learned to love, and the man who taught her she was worthy of love. This was the life Paulina had never dared dream of. But now, sitting on the balcony in her husband's arms, listening to their daughter's peaceful breathing, she knew one thing for certain. Sometimes, the most beautiful stories begin with one kiss, and their story was just unfolding, day by day, moment by moment, in a small apartment in Chicago, where two people found in each other a home. If this story moved you, remember, your inexperience isn't a flaw. It's proof you've been waiting for something real. Share this with someone who needs to hear that being untouched at 26, 30, 40 doesn't make you broken, that the right person won't rush you, but will tremble with gratitude that you chose them. That quiet doesn't mean invisible and shy doesn't mean unlovable. Subscribe if you believe in patience that looks like reverence, in first kisses that feel sacred, in men who see your vulnerability as a gift instead of a burden, and in love stories that prove sometimes the longest wait leads to the deepest connection. Because sometimes all it takes is one person brave enough to see you, one moment honest enough to change everything, and the courage to believe you deserve to be cherished exactly as you are.